Okay.
And even worship as far as studying His Word.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Guess what? All those are right, but not complete.
Well, I knew they wouldn't be complete.
The question is, when you hear the word worship, what do you think? Okay, we're going to have a worship service. What does that mean?
Preaching.
Praising God.
Praise. Going to be tough.
Oftentimes in the Old Testament it says they bowed their heads in worship, and I just said bowing your head and heart, I guess, in recognition of who God is, I think of all things.
Mm-hmm. Last week, I answered probably what most people think. Oh, we're going to worship. Yeah, okay, what are we going to sing? You know, that's kind of where I go when I hear the word generally. I just think, oh, we're getting ready to sing, you know, and stuff like that. And I dealt last week, the title, if you remember, was verbal worship, because I wanted to distinguish with what I was going to talk about today, and that is a life of worship. And so praise is one aspect of worship. And so, you know, talked about that, so I don't need to go into that. And I shared last week, the English word for worship comes from the meaning worthship, that you are declaring the worth of who you're worshiping. And so, but that's the English word, and I think it's a great word because there's a lot of Hebrew and Greek words, and they have all sorts of different meanings and stuff like that. And so, you know, with where it ends up going, I think it's kind of a neat word for it. But here's just some of the definitions of what is worship just by the Hebrew or the Greek word. Kiss toward. I picture a blowing of a kiss and stuff like that, but there was a meaning behind that of showing deference to of love towards and things like that. The word revere. Again, there's various words both in Hebrew and Greek. You know, another one is prostrate oneself. What does that mean? You are on the ground. You are on the ground. Dave, you talked a little bit mentioned that. Then another word that is used in worship means serve. Means serve. Another word more about the feeling of internally what's going on, a feeling of awe or devotion. And so there's a lot of different words, and there's even more than what I just mentioned, and these are just kind of their basic meanings. And so I put this question: worship, is it what we do in church? And it's the blank there, if you were wondering, and stuff like that. And so I would like us to look at Isaiah 1. Now, here's the answer. Yes and no. But sometimes what we do in church, dare I say, isn't worship. Okay. So think about that. Isaiah chapter 1. In fact, I got it on my sheet. Isaiah chapter 1, verse 12. Now, let me just share what you're going to be hearing. You're going to be hearing actions of worship. And a lot of the words that we think about with worship. But at the same time, you're getting a negative response from God. Okay? So I just wanted to walk through this passage. Verse 12 begins, when you come to appear before me. Okay, just stop there. You know, let's put it in today's language. When we come to gather together as his church. Now, this in Isaiah's time, it was when they come together. That would mean they're going to the temple to do what you do in the temple, okay? And so sounds like a good thing that they're doing. What does God say? Who has required of you this trampling of my courts? I mean, God's just like, you're coming in. Let me, again, just use a visual. You're messing up the carpet. You're bringing in dirt. You're just making a bunch of noise. And then he starts saying things. Bring no more vain offerings. Okay, now when I first read this, what did I picture? All right, money in the plate. No, they're talking about animal on the on the altar and stuff like that. But whatever, there's all sorts of different offerings. There is sometimes giving of money. There's giving of grain or wheat. Sometimes it's saying, I want to come before God and say thank you. I want to come before God and give a vow. I want to come before God and do all these wonderful things, for all these different means. Or I want to come before God and give a sacrifice for my sin. All these different things that were Old Testament. And what does God say? Bring no more vain offerings. And then he says this, incense. Incense was a symbol of prayers to God. It was more of what the priest did for the people, where he would come and go into the temple and they'd get incense going, and the incense altar was right before the curtains, that behind the curtains was, the Holy of Holies and stuff like that. And so incense is an abomination to me. So you have all these people coming, gathering to worship. And God says you're trampling on the floor. You're bringing vain offerings. Your incense, which is supposed to be smelling pleasing to the Lord, and He's saying it stinks. New moon and Sabbath and calling of convocations, or I cannot endure iniquity and solemn assembly. And so they had special gatherings of, we'll say, even though it's not right, it's Sunday, okay? We're coming together. It's every Sunday we come together, and but it was Saturday, but it's a Sabbath, or once a month at the new month they would do extra offerings, extra praise, extra worship, special convocations, solemn assemblies of going, let's gather together to seek the Lord. All the things are happening. Let's have a revival, all this other. And he says, I cannot endure it. Wow. But we're worshiping. Verse 14, your new moons, already talked about that, and your appointed feast. What are the appointed feasts? All the different holidays that God Himself set up to say, here, to remember Passover, you're going to be doing this. To remember your time in the wilderness, you're going to have the Feast of Booths. To remember, and to come before me for your sins to be moved away from you. The Day of Atonement. All of these things. What does He say about these appointed feasts? My soul hates. They have become a burden to me. I am weary of bearing them. When you spread out your hands, again, this is more like an individual praying. I will hide my eyes from you. Even though you make many prayers, I will not listen. Now, all of these things are actions of worship, but it's tainted. There's something wrong that they're going through the motions of worship, but the whole purpose of worship is connecting with God. They're not. If anything, they were repulsing God. It was actions of worship without a life of worship. Why won't he listen? Why is he weary of bearing up? Oh, there's another holiday they're going to mess up. What is it that their prayers, their sacrifices, all the things are being hindered? He starts by saying, your hands are full of blood. Wash yourself. Make yourself clean. Remove the evil of your deeds from before my eyes. Cease to do evil. Learn to do good. Seek justice. Correct oppression. Bring justice to the fatherless. Plead the widow's cause. And so God is telling them through Isaiah, listen, you're doing all these acts of worship, yet you don't have a life of worship. And we're going to talk about, what is that? What is that? What's that? We'll get to that in just a little bit. And he's like, listen, if you are acting like everybody else Monday through Saturday, and you show up on Sunday to worship, and you haven't given God a thought throughout the week, you're not going to worship. Jesus put it this way very harshly. This people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching as doctrines the commandments of men. In vain do they worship me. So again, what is worship? I'd like us to look at a passage that kind of tells it, one in a negative way, but then corrected by Jesus. And then even another passage. And you're going to see something that kind of defines what worship is from the life before we start doing acts of worship. Matthew chapter 4, verse 8. This is the temptations of Jesus, where right after Jesus is baptized, the Spirit led him into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. And we're going to the last temptation that Matthew records. And it says this: again, the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory. And he said to him, Satan said to Jesus, all these things I will give you if you will fall down and worship me. I want you to note those two little words. Fall down and worship me. And then Jesus said to him, begone, Satan, for it is written, you shall worship the Lord your God, and him only shall you serve. Okay, put those words in your head, okay? Bow down, worship, serve. Okay? Now I want you to go to Daniel chapter 3. Daniel chapter 3. Daniel chapter 3 is Daniel and his three friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They've made themselves in a good position until Nebuchadnezzar decides to do something else dumb. And this is when he makes a golden statue, and he demands that everybody worship it. To worship it. Now, I'm not going to go into the whole story, but let me just go down to verse 5. Verse 5. That at the moment you hear the sound of the horn, flute, lyre, trigon, psaltery, bagpipe, and all kinds of music, you are to fall down and worship the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king has set up. But whoever does not fall down and worship shall immediately be cast into the midst of the furnace of blazing fire. And so they did the thing, and almost everybody bowed down and worshiped, except for, and I don't know where Daniel was in this story. He must not have been around, because I'm sure he would have joined his friends. But his three friends did not do, and those who were jealous saw that they were not doing it. They made the king know that they would not bow down before this. They did not do the king's command. And so he brings them in and says, hey, I heard you aren't going to do this, so I'm going to give you another opportunity. I'm going to have all this music play and all these instruments play, and all you have to do is bow down and worship this image. And they respond. Let me just go to verse 17. Again, we're talking about falling down or bowing down in worship. If it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the furnace of blazing fire. And he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But even if he does not, let it be known to you, O king, that we are not going to serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. Now, when you have a sentence like that that has serve your gods, worship the, is kind of a parallel, and these words mean the same. So you have, again, worship, serve, bow down. These are images. Again, in fact, David, I almost said, be quiet. You're giving the answers of what worship is. And so here's a couple things I wanted to, using some of these, and there's other passages I could use where, which talks about we're going to bow down, we're going to worship God, we're going to serve God, all these different things. So what is worship? First of all, in the bowing down, it is a heart of surrender. A heart of surrender. That is what it meant when you bowed down. Whether you bowed like this or you went flat on your face before. Well, what did it mean? Well, one, it was admitting another's superiority. You are higher than me. You are more important to me. I am submitting under your authority. David did this to Saul. Ruth did this, and when she was an employee of Boaz. Remember the story of the brothers of Joseph? And Joseph has a dream. And he says, there were 12 stacks of wheat, and they were all there. And what did their stacks of wheat do? Bow down to Joseph's stack of wheat. And they're like, what do you think we're going to do? Worship you one? And they got all upset. And later on, guess what happened in life? They bowed down. Yeah, and so again, but it's not like, hey, you're God. It's you are superior to us. But here's another word for surrender, and I want you to think militarily. Admit total defeat. You won. I am yours for you to do or to tell me what to do. That also is the picture. The one surrendered to has the freedom to ask whatever they want from the one who surrenders. They call it unconditional surrender. Now, that's not a good thing if you just got beat and you're the army and all that. But we're bringing this to God. We're bringing this to worship. One of the first parts of worship for you to get to the right place and not just do, thinking you're worshiping, is you have to have a heart of surrender. Again, pictured in the bowing down. And what that leads to is a life and lifestyle of service. Because you've surrendered, whatever you say, I will do. Well, when you do, and here I am, I'm yours to do with what you want, to say what you want to do. You're putting that person in that position. You are superior to me. I admit I am defeated by you, and being defeated by God is a great thing. It's kind of like when Jacob lost to the wrestling of the messenger of God. Again, Jacob, it says he prevailed. Well, how did he prevail? He cried uncle. He admitted defeat. And so that leads to a life of service because, okay, I am now yours to do as you command. Because here's something, and we're going to see it illustrated in 1 Samuel 15. You could begin turning there. One cannot worship without surrender that serves or obeys. What does that mean? I have a whole week of disobedience to God, doing what I want to do, and I'm just going to, live for me. And then you come and you do some act of worship or whatever, or act of service or whatever. Listen, that's not worship. You're missing the key part. That is from a life, a heart that is surrendered. Here's the example in 1 Samuel chapter 15. This is when Saul was told to kill all, wipe out the Amalekites. I said it wrong, but anyway, and he left the king alive, he left the sheep alive, and all this other stuff. And so he is confronted with it. And then finally in verse 24, so 1 Samuel 15:24, Saul said to Samuel, I have sinned, for I transgressed the commandment of the Lord and your words, because I feared the people and obeyed their voice. Now again, he's still if you know the story, he's copping out with that statement too. It was his fault. He's trying to blame everybody else and stuff like that. But again, just with that statement alone, who did Saul put before him to follow? The people instead of the Lord. Then he says these words, now therefore please pardon my sin and return with me that I may bow before the Lord. What's he saying? I'm going to now worship God. Now, here's the thing, and to understanding Saul, he's asking Samuel, who's like the head spiritual dude, walk with me so I can worship God publicly. I want to look good, is what he's saying. And Samuel said to Saul, I will not return with you, for you have rejected the word of the Lord, and the Lord has rejected you from being king over Israel. Now, I believe if Saul was really repentant, no, he just wanted to look good. He wanted to go through the vain worship. He wanted to just, okay, I know I just obeyed God and all that, but come on, let's just go and worship, without dealing with his heart. One cannot worship without surrender. That leads to serving. I shared this verse last week. It's on your sheet. Romans 12:1. I think it's going to mean a little bit more of what we just talked about. I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, all the good things, all the times God has forgiven, all the things that God has done. I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service of worship. Again, there's different translations there, but that's basically what it means. Your spiritual worship. What is your spiritual worship? I present my body. Here I am, God. What do you want to do? What do you want me to do? What do you want me to say? So what is worship? Worship is all of me presented fully to God. And what flows from that? Because you've surrendered, I've surrendered my desires, my dreams, my time, my relationships, my stuff, etc., 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 to serve his desires, his dreams, his will. Now, what does that look like? Well, yeah, saying things we talked about. Yes, it looks like studying your Bible, your devotions, your prayer, your fellowship, your ministry. But guess what? You could have a Bible study and devotions and prayer and fellowship and ministry and not be connecting because you're just the vain worship, because you haven't gotten to the heart. So true worship, it begins in the heart. It begins with submission. It goes to service. And some of the service could be singing. Some of the service, whatever God is desiring for us. Yes, it happens in the church. It's what we do in the church. It's what we do, into the community. But guess what? It goes beyond all of these things. It also goes to our work. It says in Ephesians 6, bondservants, obey your earthly masters with fear and trembling, with a sincere heart, as you would Christ. Now listen. We have one master, and that one master said, hey, when it comes to work, obey your boss. I know that's not quite exactly what it says. It talked about slaves and stuff like that. And don't be just with eye service when they're looking at you, but you are pleasing God. You're a bondservant to Christ. And so listen. To almost do the song that the seven dwarves, instead of whistle while you work, worship as you work. And whether it's a paid job or a volunteer or your housework or whatever, it can all be worship. Vacuuming the floor can be worship. Listen, school, the kid, you're all done. You're done, Riley. You're good, great. School can be an act of worship. Wouldn't it be great to have a class full of worshiping kids? God, I just want to do what you want to do, and so we're going to follow what Miss Caroline says. That's what it should look like. But again, it's worship. Listen, our hobbies. Again, starting with God, it's all yours and all that. It's not like God's going to go, I'm going to take everything fun out of your life and you're going to, No. It's living life even fuller because you're living life for Him. And so worship isn't just, yes, it is what we're supposed to do here. There's a lot of the religious things that we do, but listen, everything we do should be worship. God, because I surrender to you my mind, my body, me, all of me. Whatever you want. And as Paul put it in 1 Corinthians 10:31. So whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, do it all for the glory of God. Let's pray. Jesus, I know I have been guilty of going through the motions. Whether it be in a corporate worship setting or in my own quiet time. Help us to daily, as your word says, present our bodies. We surrender. What do you want done? God, how that would put fire to our own Bible study, our own prayer time, our own work, our own ministries. Because we truly are doing it for you. To you be the glory, I pray. Amen.